in the endless void between stars, where even gods fear to tread. Something impossible happened. A human survived. Not just survived, he thrived. And when Commander Marcus Chen returned to the Galactic Council that had condemned him to die, he brought with him a creature so ancient and powerful that entire civilizations had built religions around avoiding it. The same council members who had laughed as they ejected his escape pod into the void sector now trembled as his ship's shadow fell across their capital world. They had cast out one man to preserve their precious order. He came back commanding chaos itself, and this time, humanity would not be denied their place among the stars. The emergency klaxon screamed through the corridors of the Galactic Council enforcement vessel, Righteous Judgment, as Commander Marcus Chen fought against the magnetic restraints binding him to the interrogation chair. Blood ran down his face from the beating the Zilliq guards had given him, but his eyes remained defiant, burning with an intensity that made even his captors uncomfortable. High Council of Vaxhi, a towering crystalline being whose species had ruled the Outer Rim for 3 millennia, leaned forward with what passed for a smile among the Mortak. His translucent face reflected the harsh lighting of the chamber, creating fractal patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Commander Chen of the Terran Defense Force, his voice resonated like breaking glass. You have been found guilty of the highest crime possible under galactic law. You dared to suggest that humans deserve a seat on the High Council. Marcus spat blood onto the polished floor. My species has earned it 10 times over. We've saved your collective hides from the Void Hunters, stopped the Plague Wars, and solved your energy crisis. What more do you want? A chorus of alien laughter filled the chamber. Councillor Zaktorn, whose slug-like form pulsed with bioluminescent mockery, spoke in his wet, bubbling voice. Humans are barely evolved primates. You've existed for what, 10,000 years of civilization? My people were building stargates when your ancestors were discovering fire. The Morthak conquered death itself while humans were still painting on cave walls. And yet, Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through their amusement like a blade, when the Devourer fleet came from Andromeda, who stood and fought while you all prepared to flee, when the reality plague started turning worlds inside out, who found the cure? When your ancient stargates started failing and stranding billions, who figured out how to repair technology you'd forgotten how to build? The laughter died. High Councillor Vexhi's crystalline features darkened. Humans are tools. Useful tools, but tools nonetheless. You fight because you're too stupid to understand when you're outmatched. You solve problems because you're too ignorant to know they're impossible. You don't deserve to rule anything, least of all civilizations that existed when your sun was still forming. Marcus tested his restraints again, feeling the magnetic locks strain against his augmented strength. Standard restraints designed for standard species. They hadn't accounted for human military modifications. You're afraid of us, he said, realization dawning in his voice. That's what this is really about. You're terrified that if humans get a voice in galactic affairs, everyone will see what we already know. And what's that, little ape? Councillor Thessa hissed, her serpentine form coiling in agitation. The Nagai were known for their patience, but even they had limits. That your failures. Every single one of your species peaked long ago, and has been coasting on past glory ever since. The Morthak haven't made a significant discovery in 2,000 years. The Zelak military doctrine hasn't changed since the Battle of Carrion Station. The Nagai are so obsessed with tradition that they still use weapons designed before humans discovered metal. Marcus's voice grew stronger with each word. You're not our superiors. You're relics. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Vexhi stood, his crystalline form towering 9 feet tall, refracting the chamber's light into sharp, painful beams. You want to know what happens to relics that forget their place, human? They get discarded. The trial, if it could be called that, lasted another hour. No evidence was presented in Marcus's defense. No witnesses were called. The verdict had been decided before he was even brought aboard the ship. The charges were formally read: sedition, inciting rebellion among lesser species, and the ultimate crime of advocating for human representation on the High Council. As they dragged him toward the disposal bay, Marcus caught sight of the news feeds playing on the corridor monitors. Earth was celebrating. Humanity thought their greatest military hero was being honored with a special assignment to the Council fleet. They had no idea their representative was about to be murdered in the cold vacuum of space. The disposal bay was exactly what it sounded like. A chamber designed to jettison waste into space. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus as they sealed him inside a basic life pod, One designed for emergency evacuation but lacking the range to reach any inhabited system. It was a slow death sentence disguised as mercy. "Any last words, Commander?" Vex High's voice echoed through the pod's communication system. Marcus strapped himself in and checked the pod's systems. 72 hours of life support, basic navigation, no faster than light capability. The nearest human colony was 6 months away at sublight speed. The nearest alien outpost was even farther. They'd calculated it perfectly. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I'll see you around." Vexay's crystalline laughter followed him into the void as the pod's engines fired, pushing him away from the enforcement vessel and toward what should have been certain death. The righteous judgment jumped to hyperspace seconds later, leaving him alone in an empty stretch of space between the spiral arms. For the first day, Marcus catalogued his situation with military precision. The pod's computer confirmed what he already knew: insufficient fuel to reach any inhabited system, limited food supplies, and no faster-than-light communication capability. By all rights, he should have used the emergency termination system and died with dignity. Instead, he began to modify the pod's systems. Human engineering had always been considered crude by galactic standards. Where other species built elegant, efficient machines that lasted for centuries, humans built things that could be fixed with spare parts and determination. The life pod was a perfect example. Built by the lowest bidder, designed to keep someone alive long enough for rescue, and simple enough that a child could repair it with basic tools. Marcus wasn't a child, and he had military-grade augmentations that enhanced not just his strength and reflexes, but his ability to interface directly with electronic systems. Within hours, he had rewired the pod's power distribution, optimized the life support systems for maximum efficiency, and began cannibalizing non-essential components to build something no alien engineer would have thought possible: a long-range distress beacon that could punch through the interdimensional barriers between normal space and the void sector. The void sector. Even thinking about it made most aliens break out in whatever passed for cold sweat among their species. It was a region of space where the laws of physics worked differently, where time flowed in loops and straight lines led to yesterday. Ancient civilizations had gone to great lengths to map its boundaries and post warnings. Ships that entered the void sector were never seen again, which was exactly why it was the perfect place to hide. By the third day, Marcus had succeeded in modifying his trajectory. The pod's engines weren't designed for major course corrections, but human military training included improvised navigation techniques that other species considered impossible. Using the pod's attitude thrusters and the gravitational pull of a nearby neutron star, he managed to slingshot himself toward the void sector's boundary. As the pod crossed the threshold, reality began to behave strangely. The stars outside the viewport shifted colors, moving through spectrums that human eyes weren't designed to see. Time moved in stutters and jumps. Marcus's chronometer showed him living the same hour 3 times, then skipping forward by 6 hours in a single moment. But he was alive, and that was more than the Galactic Council had expected. The life pod drifted through impossible geometries for what felt like weeks but registered as days on some instruments and centuries on others. Marcus entered a meditative state, using techniques learned during deep space missions to conserve oxygen and maintain his sanity while reality twisted around him. It was during one of these meditation sessions that he first sensed the presence. Something vast moved through the twisted space around him, something so large that his pod registered only the tiniest fraction of its surface. The life support systems went haywire, detecting atmospheric compositions that violated known chemistry and gravitational fields that pointed in directions that didn't exist. Marcus opened his eyes and looked out the viewport. What he saw challenged every assumption he'd held about life, intelligence, and the nature of the universe itself. The entity that surrounded his pod defied description in any language created by 3-dimensional beings. It was part machine, part organism, part living geometry. Surfaces that should have been solid flickered between states of matter. Appendages that might have been tentacles or might have been probability waves reached through dimensions that folded space-time like origami. And it was looking at him. The communication came not through radio waves or any conventional medium, but directly into his consciousness. The voice was older than stellar formation, deeper than the space between atoms, and tinged with an amusement that had watched civilizations rise and fall like ocean tides. Curious, a 3-dimensional being in a primitive vessel. How did you find your way into our domain, little creature? Marcus had faced down alien warlords, navigated diplomatic crises, and commanded fleets in battles that decided the fate of solar systems. None of it had prepared him for this moment. But he was still human, and humans were nothing if not adaptable. "I was cast out to die," he said aloud, knowing somehow that the entity could hear him. "The Galactic Council decided my species was too dangerous to have a voice in their government." Asterisk the small minds that cluster around their tiny stars. They still exist? We had assumed their petty squabbles would have destroyed them by now. The amusement in the voice grew stronger. Asterisk, tell me, little creature, what made them fear you enough to send you here? They called it sedition. I suggested that humans had earned the right to help govern the galaxy we've spent decades protecting. Marcus found his fear fading, replaced by the same steady determination that had carried him through every impossible situation his military career had thrown at him. They were afraid we'd show them up. Asterisk, and with you have. Without question. The laughter that followed was like the sound of stars being born. We have not been entertained by the affairs of three-dimensional beings for eons. Your species interests us. Tell me, Marcus Chen of Terra, what would you do if we gave you the power to return to those who cast you out? I'd show them exactly why they should have been afraid, even if it meant commanding forces that would horrify your own people. Marcus thought about Earth, about the colonies spreading throughout human space, about the young men and women who looked up to him as a symbol of humanity's potential. Then he thought about the council chamber, about alien laughter as they sentenced him to death for the crime of believing his species mattered. Sometimes, he said quietly, you have to become the monster to protect what you love. The entity that surrounded his pod began to change, its impossible geometry shifting into configurations that hurt to perceive. Asterisk. Very well, Marcus Chen. We will make you an offer that your kind would call a deal with the devil. We will give you the power to return to your galaxy commanding forces beyond their comprehension. In exchange, you will serve as our agent in three-dimensional space, our eyes and hands in a realm we find too constrained to navigate directly. What's the catch? Marcus asked. There's always a catch. The catch, as you put it, is simple. The power we offer will change you. Your people may no longer recognize you as one of their own. The enemies you face will fear you more than they ever feared your species, and the line between protector and destroyer will become very thin indeed. Marcus looked out at the twisted space around him, at the impossible entity that had made him this offer. He thought about humanity's future, about the choice between certain extinction under alien rule or uncertain survival under his protection. I accept. The transformation began immediately. The life pod dissolved around him, its matter reorganized at the molecular level into something far more sophisticated. Marcus felt his body changing as well, his augmentations expanding and evolving, his consciousness broadening to encompass perspectives that four-dimensional beings took for granted. But through it all, he remained human at his core. That was the point, after all. The entity needed someone who could function in normal space-time while wielding power that existed outside it. They needed a bridge between dimensions, and Marcus Chen was about to become exactly that. As the changes completed, Marcus found himself standing on what might generously be called a bridge, if bridges could exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously, while maintaining perfect structural integrity in 3. Around him, the entity's vast form had reconfigured itself into something that his enhanced perception could recognize as a ship, though it bore no resemblance to any vessel built by galactic civilization. Asterisk, your training begins now. The entity's voice resonated through structures that existed partially in his mind and partially in folded space. Asterisk, you must learn to command forces that exist outside normal reality while maintaining your connection to it. The Galactic Council cast you out as one man. You will return as something far more dangerous, a human who has learned to think like us. Marcus felt power flowing through him, knowledge that had been accumulated over cosmic ages flooding his consciousness. He learned to perceive reality as the entity did, as a malleable structure that could be reshaped through will and understanding. He learned to command technologies that operated on principles his species hadn't discovered yet, weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics in localized regions of space-time. But most importantly, he learned patience. The entity existed on timescales measured in geological epochs. What seemed like an eternity of training to Marcus was barely a moment to his new mentor. When he was finally ready to return to normal space, 6 months had passed in the galaxy beyond the Void Sector. 6 months for Earth to mourn their lost hero. 6 months for the Galactic Council to congratulate themselves on eliminating the human threat. 6 months for them to grow comfortable with their restored order. Marcus stood on his impossible bridge, looking out at sensors that showed him the location of the Council fleet. and smiled with entirely too many teeth. It was time to go home. The first sign that something was wrong came to the Galactic Council's early warning network as a series of impossible readings from deep space sensors positioned along the outer rim. Physics didn't work the way the instruments claimed it was working. Space-time itself was bending around something that shouldn't exist, creating gravitational lenses that focused light from distant stars into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Kesvar of the Zilak Defense Fleet was the first to receive the alert. His six-armed form hunched over the tactical display in the command center of Nexus Prime, the Council's military headquarters. What he saw there made his secondary heart skip beats. Sensor ghost? His aide, a young Morthak named Vessel, suggested hopefully. Sensor ghosts don't generate tachyon cascades, Kesvar muttered, his mandibles clicking in agitation. And they certainly don't show mass readings equivalent to a small moon moving at 0.7 light speed. The readings were getting stronger. Whatever was coming wasn't trying to hide its approach. If anything, it seemed to be announcing itself, reality warping around its passage like a stone thrown into calm water. The ripples it created were visible on sensors throughout 3 sectors. Sir? Vessel's voice cracked slightly. The quantum signature doesn't match any known ship design. It's not Zilak, not Mortak, not even ancient technology. The computer can't classify it at all. Kesvar studied the data flowing across his screens. In 30 years of military service, he'd seen ships from every major civilization in the galaxy. Undertaken. He'd fought the Void Hunters' living vessels, commanded task forces against the Devourer fleet's biomechanical nightmares, and personally inspected ancient ruins that predated most current species by millions of years. This was something entirely different. How long until it reaches the outer perimeter? He asked. At current velocity, approximately 6 hours, sir. 6 hours. Kesvar's mind raced through defensive protocols. The outer perimeter was defended by automated platforms armed with Nova-class weapons, devices capable of sterilizing entire planets. Nothing short of a full battle fleet could penetrate that defense grid. Alert the High Council, he ordered, and begin evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. Sir, evacuation? The perimeter defenses have never faced anything like this. Kesvar's voice was grim. Trust me, Vessel. When something moves through space like that and doesn't try to hide, it's because it doesn't need to. 3 hours later, the unknown vessel dropped out of whatever passed for faster-than-light travel and came to a complete stop just outside the perimeter defense grid. The sensors finally got a clear look at it, and the results sent waves of panic through every species' military command. The ship defied classification because it wasn't quite a ship in any conventional sense. Parts of it existed in normal 3-dimensional space, sleek and predatory like a blade designed by mathematics itself. But other sections phased in and out of reality, existing in dimensions that the best alien science could detect but not comprehend. It was as if someone had taken a conventional starship and folded it through geometries that shouldn't exist. More disturbing were the energy readings. The vessel generated power outputs that registered off every scale the Council's instruments possessed. Not because it was producing massive amounts of energy, but because it was tapping into sources that existed outside normal space-time entirely. High Councilor Vexay materialized in the command center through emergency teleportation, his crystalline form crackling with barely contained energy. Report, he demanded. Unknown vessel, impossible configuration, power source beyond our understanding. Kesvar summarized efficiently. It's not responding to hails and it's just sitting there. Weapon signatures? Everything about it is a weapon signature, sir. The ship itself is weaponizing space-time distortions. If it wanted to attack, I'm not sure our defenses could stop it. Vexay studied the tactical display, his fractal features shifting as he processed the implications. The ship's design triggered something in his racial memory, something ancient and terrifying that his people had spent millennia trying to forget. Open a channel, he ordered finally. The communication array crackled to life, broadcasting on every frequency the Council used for first contact protocols. The response came immediately, but not through their communication system. Instead, a voice spoke directly into the minds of everyone in the command center, bypassing their hearing entirely and resonating in the spaces between their thoughts. Greetings, High Councilor Vexay, did you miss me? The voice was human. Specifically, it was the voice of the human they'd executed 6 months ago. Impossible, Vexay whispered, his crystalline structure flickering between solid and energy states. Marcus Chen is dead. We ejected him into the void sector. Nothing survives the void. Nothing from your dimension, the voice replied, tinged with dark amusement. But the void has its own residents, and they found me very interesting. Interesting enough to make me an offer I couldn't refuse. The ship moved then, not through space, but through the dimensions that folded around space. One moment it was at the perimeter, the next it was inside the defense grid, having simply stepped sideways through reality to bypass every weapon the Council possessed. The automated platforms didn't even have time to target it before it was already past them. "I've come to collect on a debt," Marcus's voice continued as his impossible ship approached the station. "You took something from me. My life, my species' future, their right to representation in galactic affairs. I'm here to make a counteroffer. We will not negotiate with terrorists," HFY declared, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Terrorist? That's rich. Coming from the beings who sentenced me to death for suggesting humans deserve a voice in their own governance." The ship was close enough now that its gravitational distortions were affecting the station's systems. Lights flickered and artificial gravity fluctuated as space-time itself bent around the vessel's presence. "I prefer to think of myself as a debt collector." Admiral Cassava was frantically coordinating defensive positions, but his screens showed him the futility of the situation. Every weapon system they turned toward the approaching vessel simply ceased to function, not disabled, not destroyed, but fundamentally unable to operate in the distorted space-time around the ship. "What do you want?" HFY asked finally. "Simple. Humanity gets full voting rights on the High Council, effective immediately. All anti-human legislation is rescinded. Earth and its colonies are granted the same trade rights and territorial protections as any other Council member. And if we refuse?" Then you learn why the entities in the void sector are so feared that your ancestors built their entire civilization around avoiding them. To demonstrate his point, Marcus's ship extended what might generously be called a weapon, if weapons could exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The device focused on a small asteroid mining station 3 light minutes away and simply removed it from existence. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but edited out of reality so completely that the space it had occupied forgot it had ever been there. The silence in the command center was absolute. "You've become a monster." Councillor Zactorn's voice bubbled through the communication system transmitted from his location on the council floor. "You made me into one," Marcus replied. "The question is, do you want to see what else I learned during my stay in the void, or are you ready to discuss terms?" The emergency session that followed was unlike anything in the council's history. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Chamber, but their attention was focused on the impossible ship hanging in space above them, clearly visible through the transparent dome that covered the assembly hall. High Councillor HFY took his position at the center of the chamber, his crystalline form reflecting the light from Marcus's ship in fractal patterns that made the other representatives uncomfortable. "Commander Chen," he began formally, "you demand representation for your species based on threats of violence. This is not how civilized beings conduct diplomacy. Civilized beings don't execute representatives for doing their jobs." Marcus's voice responded, still speaking directly into their minds. "Besides, I'm not threatening violence. I'm offering a choice. Accept humanity as equals, or learn why every advanced civilization in this galaxy has gone to great lengths to avoid the void sector. You cannot seriously expect us to capitulate to blackmail from a single human." Councillor Thessa hissed, her serpentine form coiled in agitation. "A single human commanding forces you can't comprehend, backed by entities that exist outside your reality."
Marcus corrected.
"And I'm not asking for capitulation. I'm demanding recognition of what humanity has already earned through blood and sacrifice." He activated his ship's projection systems, filling the chamber with holographic displays showing human actions over the past century, battles against the Void Hunters where human forces had held the line while alien fleets retreated. Research stations where human scientists had solved problems their alien colleagues considered impossible. Colonies where humans had terraformed worlds that other species had written off as uninhabitable. Every major crisis of the last 100 years, Marcus continued, has been solved primarily through human innovation, human courage, and human sacrifice. Yet you've consistently denied my species any meaningful voice in galactic governance. You've treated us as useful pets, clever enough to solve your problems but too dangerous to give real power. "Because humans are dangerous," HFY replied. "Your species is barely 10,000 years old, yet you've achieved technological advancement that took others millions of years to develop. You solve impossible problems by ignoring the fact that they're impossible. You fight wars that sane beings would flee from. Do you expect us to simply ignore the threat you represent? The threat we represent?" Marcus's laughter echoed through dimensions the council representatives couldn't perceive. Look around you, Counselor. Your people have controlled this galaxy for 3,000 years, and what have you achieved? Stagnation. Decline. You've become so obsessed with maintaining your current power structures that you've forgotten how to grow, how to innovate, how to face real challenges. He gestured, and new holograms appeared, showing the current state of Galactic Council space. Worlds slowly dying as their populations aged and declined. Technologies stagnating as species became too risk-averse to pursue dangerous innovations. Military forces that could only respond to threats with tactics developed centuries ago. Meanwhile, Marcus continued, in the 100 years since humanity joined galactic civilization, we've revolutionized medicine, developed new faster-than-light technologies, solved energy crises you'd given up on, and defended this galaxy against threats that would have destroyed your precious order. We've earned our place at this table through merit, not through intimidation. Then why are you here threatening us? Councillor Rachmith demanded, his insectoid form clicking with agitation. Because merit isn't enough for you, is it? You understand force, you understand fear, you understand the threat of consequences. Marcus's ship moved closer to the station, its reality-warping field causing the lights in the chamber to flicker. So let me be very clear about the consequences of refusing humanity's rightful place in galactic governance. The ship's systems interfaced with the station's computers, bypassing every security protocol the Council possessed and displaying information that sent waves of panic through the assembled representatives. Fleet positions, defense configurations, resource allocation, secret diplomatic negotiations, everything the Council thought was secure was laid bare in seconds. This is just what I can do to your information systems, Marcus explained casually. Would you like to see what I can do to your physical infrastructure? Your trade routes? Your colonies? This is madness, Zactorn bubbled desperately. Even if we agreed to your demands, our member species would never accept human authority. They'll accept it, or they'll be replaced by species that will, Marcus replied, his voice taking on a cold edge that made even the ancient Mortak shiver. Evolution doesn't stop just because you're comfortable with the status quo, counselors. The galaxy is changing, whether you adapt to it or not. Humanity is the future of galactic civilization. You can be part of that future, or you can be remembered as the obstacles we had to remove. The debate that followed raged for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Marcus's ship hung above them like a sword of Damocles, a constant reminder that the old order was ending whether they accepted it gracefully or not. Representatives who had spent centuries believing in their species' inherent superiority were forced to confront the reality that they were no longer the dominant powers in the galaxy. When the final vote was called, it wasn't even close. Humanity was granted full council membership, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. The anti-human trade restrictions were lifted. Earth and its colonies were granted the same territorial protections as any other member world. But Marcus wasn't finished. There's one more condition, he announced as the representatives began to file out of the chamber. Vex Hayes' crystalline form flickered with barely contained fury. We have given you everything you demanded. You've given humanity what we always deserved. But there's still the matter of justice for the crime committed against me personally. Marcus's ship rotated slowly, its impossible geometries casting shadows that fell upward. The individuals responsible for my attempted murder will face consequences. You cannot seriously expect us to prosecute members of the High Council for following galactic law, Thessa protested. Galactic law that was deliberately designed to exclude and marginalize humanity, Marcus corrected. Laws that were never legitimate because they were created without the consent of the species they governed. But I'm not interested in your courts or your justice system. I'm interested in making sure this never happens again. The ship's weapons systems activated, but instead of targeting the station, they focused on something far more subtle. Each of the council members who had voted to execute Marcus found themselves marked with quantum signatures that would follow them wherever they went, across any distance, through any dimension. They would never be alone again, never be safe, never be free from the knowledge that Marcus Chen was watching them. Consider it a reminder, Marcus explained. A motivation to govern wisely and justly. Because the next time any council member decides that humans are too dangerous to have a voice in their own governance, I'll be there to demonstrate exactly how dangerous we can be. As his ship prepared to depart, leaving the council to grapple with their new reality, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The impossible vessel that had once been a simple life pod-oriented itself toward Earth, toward home, toward the species that still believed their greatest champion was dead. It was time to let humanity know that their representative had returned, and that the galaxy would never be the same. The celebration in Times Square had been going on for 3 days when the impossible ship appeared in Earth's orbit. Humanity had received word of their acceptance into the Galactic Council through official channels, but the details had been classified at the highest levels. All they knew was that their dreams of galactic representation had finally been realized, and the party showed no signs of stopping. Admiral Sarah Chen, Marcus's younger sister and current head of Earth's Stellar Defense Force, was in her office reviewing the classified reports when her aide burst through the door without knocking. "Ma'am, you need to see this," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, his face pale as he activated the office's main display screen. The image that appeared made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Hanging in space above Earth was a vessel that challenged every assumption about ship design. Parts of it flickered in and out of existence, existing in dimensions that human eyes couldn't properly process. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, like a work of art created by something that understood mathematics on a level that transcended human comprehension. "When did it arrive?" Sarah asked, her training taking over despite the shock. 17 minutes ago. It just appeared. No hyperspace signature, no gravitational wake, nothing. 1 second empty space, the next second it was there. Sarah studied the readings flowing across her screen. The ship generated energy signatures that made no sense, manipulated space-time in ways that violated known physics, and yet somehow felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. "Has it responded to any hails?" "No, ma'am. But it's broadcasting on an old Terran Defense Force frequency. Command codes that were classified above our clearance level." Sarah's heart began to race. There was only one person who had possessed those codes, and he had been declared dead 6 months ago. "Put me through to the ship." Priority Alpha protocols. The communication system crackled to life, and when the response came, Sarah had to grip her desk to keep from falling over. "Hello, little sister. Miss me?" "Marcus?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're supposed to be dead." "The Council said you were lost in a diplomatic mission." The Council lied. "They tried to execute me for the crime of believing humanity deserved a voice in galactic affairs." Fortunately, death wasn't as permanent as they thought. The story that followed challenged everything Sarah thought she knew about the universe. Marcus told her about the trial, the execution attempt, his time in the void sector, and the entity that had transformed him into something far more than human. He explained his confrontation with the Council and the terms of humanity's acceptance into galactic governance. "You threatened them," Sarah said when he finished. "You held a gun to the galaxy's head and demanded recognition. I demonstrated that humanity was far more dangerous than they imagined," Marcus corrected. "The recognition was always deserved. I simply provided the motivation for them to admit it." Sarah looked at the tactical displays showing her brother's impossible ship. The vessel's mere presence was affecting Earth's orbital mechanics, its gravitational field operating according to principles that human science couldn't explain. "What have you become, Marcus? Something that can protect our species from forces you can't imagine. Something that can ensure humanity's survival in a galaxy that sees us as a threat to their established order." His voice carried undertones that seemed to come from vast distances. "I'm still your brother, Sarah. I'm still human. But I'm also something more now." "The people need to see you," Sarah said finally. "They think you're dead." "They've been mourning their greatest hero for months. Are they ready to see what their greatest hero has become? I'm not the same man who left Earth 6 months ago. I command forces that exist outside normal spacetime. I've made alliances with entities that your scientists would consider impossible. The ship I travel in is partially alive, partially mechanical, and partially composed of folded spacetime itself." Sarah considered this carefully. She was a military officer, trained to assess threats and make hard decisions. The being claiming to be her brother represented power on a scale that could reshape galactic civilization. But beneath the alien technologies and impossible capabilities, she could still hear the man who had taught her to fly, who had inspired her to join the military, who had always put humanity's welfare above his own comfort. "They need hope," she said finally. "Earth is celebrating our acceptance into the Council, but we both know the real challenges are just beginning. The alien species that have run things for millennia aren't going to welcome human authority gladly. If they see that Marcus Chen is still alive, still fighting for them, it will give them something to believe in. Even if I'm no longer entirely human myself?" Sarah smiled despite everything. "Marcus, you were never entirely human. You were always something more." Now you just have the power to match your ambitions. The reunion took place at the United Nations building in New York, with representatives from every human government in attendance. The meeting hall had been hastily reconfigured with holographic displays and quantum communication systems that could handle Marcus's unique transmission requirements. When his image appeared in the center of the hall, the silence was absolute. The figure that materialized was recognizably Marcus Chen, but changed in ways that were difficult to quantify. His eyes held depths that seemed to extend beyond physical space. When he moved, reality rippled slightly around him. He existed simultaneously in the meeting hall and somewhere else entirely, his presence spanning multiple dimensions. "My fellow humans," he began, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond normal hearing. "I stand before you today, not as the man who left Earth 6 months ago, but as something new. Something that this galaxy has never seen before." He told them about his transformation, about the forces he now commanded, about the price he had paid to secure humanity's place among the stars. The representatives listened in stunned silence as he described entities that existed outside normal space-time, technologies that operated on principles human science was only beginning to discover, and the responsibility that came with wielding such power. "You're asking us to trust you," President Martinez said when Marcus finished his explanation. "To follow someone who admits he's no longer entirely human. I'm asking you to trust that I'm still fighting for the same goals I've always fought for," Marcus replied. "Humanity's survival, our right to determine our own destiny, our place among the civilized species of the galaxy." He paused, his multi-dimensional eyes focusing on something beyond the physical room. "The universe is far stranger and more dangerous than any of us imagined. The threats we face in the coming years will make the Void Hunters look like a minor inconvenience. Humanity needs protectors who can operate on the same level as those threats. And you've appointed yourself as our protector?" Secretary General Okafor asked. "I've become what humanity needs me to be," Marcus answered. "The question is whether you're ready to accept what that means." The debate that followed was intense but brief. The representatives were politicians and military leaders, trained to make hard decisions based on incomplete information. They could see the reports from the council confrontation, the evidence of Marcus's power, the reality of humanity's new status in galactic affairs. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Earth would support Marcus Chen's new role as humanity's representative to forces beyond normal space-time, with the understanding that he would continue to serve human interests above all others. But Marcus had one final revelation for them. "There's something else you need to know," he said, as the meeting prepared to adjourn. "I'm not the only human to have made contact with the entities beyond the void sector." The holographic displays around the room activated, showing images of other impossible ships. Other humans who had been transformed by contact with higher dimensional beings. Some had been lost explorers who had stumbled into regions of space where physics worked differently. Others had been prisoners or exiles cast out by various alien governments and presumed dead. All had been found by the entities in the void sector. All had been given choices similar to Marcus's. Not all had chosen to remain human in their loyalties. "The galaxy is changing," Marcus explained. "Humans are encountering forces that exist outside normal reality, and some of them are making alliances that don't necessarily align with Earth's interests. The Council cast me out expecting me to die quietly. Instead, they created something that could reshape galactic civilization, but I'm not the only one." He showed them readings from deep space, signatures of reality distortions that indicated the presence of other void-touched entities. Some were approaching human space, others had made contact with alien civilizations that saw them as potential weapons against humanity's rising influence. "The old order is ending," Marcus continued. "The galaxy is entering an age where the line between science and magic becomes meaningless, where beings can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, where the laws of physics are more like guidelines than absolute rules. Humanity can be leaders in this new era, or we can be victims of it." Sarah stepped forward from her position among the military representatives. "What do you need from us?" "Patience, trust, and the understanding that the battles ahead will be fought on scales and in dimensions that previous generations couldn't have imagined." Marcus's image began to fade as he prepared to return to his ship. "I've secured our place at the council table, but that's just the beginning. The real work starts now." As his presence withdrew from the meeting hall, Marcus left behind a series of communication protocols and emergency signals that would allow Earth to contact him if needed. But he also left them with the knowledge that their protector was no longer entirely one of them, and that the future they were entering would challenge every assumption about what it meant to be human. 3 months later, the first of the other void-touched entities arrived in human space. Unlike Marcus, this being had chosen to shed its humanity entirely, becoming something that viewed its former species as raw material for its experiments in higher dimensional existence. The battle that followed took place across 17 dimensions simultaneously, with weapons that redefined local space-time and tactics that involved manipulating probability itself. It ended with Marcus victorious, but changed once again, his connection to normal reality growing thinner as he absorbed powers and knowledge from his defeated opponent. Standing on the bridge of his impossible ship, looking out at Earth through sensors that could perceive across multiple universes simultaneously, Marcus Chen reflected on the price of victory. He had saved humanity from extinction under alien rule, secured their place as leaders in galactic civilization, and protected them from threats they couldn't even comprehend. But with each battle, each use of his powers, each decision made from perspectives that spanned dimensions, he became something less recognizably human. He was still fighting for humanity's survival, still serving their interests, still the man who had been willing to sacrifice everything for his species' future. The question was whether humanity would still recognize him as one of their own when the next crisis came, and whether that recognition would matter when set against the survival of the species he had sworn to protect. In the end, Marcus Chen had gotten exactly what he had demanded from the Galactic Council: humanity's rightful place among the civilized species of the galaxy. The cost had been his own humanity, transformed piece by piece into something that could command the forces necessary to defend his people. He had been cast out to die and had returned commanding a monster. The only question now was whether the monster was his ship, his powers, or himself. But as long as humanity survived and thrived, Marcus found that he could live with the ambiguity.